Good evening all and welcome. Tonight I have a chilling collection of Babysitter scary stories, so get comfortable and let the darkness take control. It was Super Bowl Sunday 2004. I was just a toddler of maybe around 2, and my parents had plans to watch the game at a bar with friends. They hired a 16-year-old family friend to babysit me. She had just one job: to stay in the house and not leave under any circumstances, and they wouldn't be gone long. Of course, being 16, she didn't listen. Instead, she decided to take me to her friend's house to watch the game with her. I was too young to understand what was happening, just sitting in my little stroller while she wheeled me along the streets of Chicago at night in the middle of winter. We must have not gone far, since we walked there. She probably thought she'd be back before my parents even noticed. But after the game, she panicked and realized they might be her home. So she grabbed me and started rushing me back. But in her haste, she forgot one very important detail. She didn't buckle me into the stroller. We were heading down a quiet street not far from home when a car started crawling beside us. It matched our pace. Then the passenger side door flew open and a man lunged out and grabbed me. It was that fast. 1 second I was rolling along the stroller, and the next I was being pulled up by a stranger. I don't remember the sound of my own crying, but what I remember is the chaos of the moment, the cold air, the scream that came from the babysitter. And then she snapped. What she did next is probably the only reason I'm here to tell this story. You see, what my parents hadn't considered when they hired her was that she happened to be an incredibly skilled boxer. Without hesitating, this 16-year-old beat the absolute living hell out of this guy. Fists were flying, a knee to the ribs and a punch in the throat. She didn't hold back, and he dropped me almost immediately. Whoever they were in that car, they clearly never expected a teenage girl to fight back like that. They peeled off in a screech of tires and vanished into the night. We sprinted home. When my parents got back, they were furious. Of course, she'd taken me out of their house, broken their trust. But once the reality of what almost happened sank in, the mood shifted from angry to shaken. We called the police, filed a report. The car was never found. The man was never identified, and nothing ever came of it. She never babysat for us again. You know the weirdest part? This attempted kidnapping is my first memory. It's the first thing my brain decided to hold on to. Not a birthday, not a stuffed animal, not a trip to the zoo. Just the freezing wind, the open car door, and the blur of violence as a 16-year-old saved my life. And somewhere out there's a grown man who got his ass beat by a teenage girl trying to snatch a kid on Super Bowl Sunday. I started babysitting when I was 15, mostly for my mum's co-workers or their neighbors. We lived in a small wooded town where everyone seemed to know everyone else, or at least pretended to. I did it mostly for the money, to buy emo CDs and spiked bracelets from the mall. Stuff my mum called goth trash. One Saturday evening in October, I was hired to watch 2 kids, a girl called Ren of 9 and a boy called Mika of 7. Their parents, a stiff, overly formal couple with grey, tight-lipped smiles, handed me a rigidly detailed schedule. Dinner at 6:30 sharp, no screens after 7, and lights out by 8:30. They also made a joke about how they'd skin alive any boy who showed up while they were gone. I laughed awkwardly, but their faces never changed. The moment the front door shut behind them, Ren turned to Micah and said in a sing-song voice, "They're gone, all gone, just us and the bones now." Micah didn't even blink. "Let's play the slicing game." "What's that?" "You'll see," Ren whispered, then stared at me unblinkingly as she slowly walked away. I shook it off. Kids say weird stuff sometimes. But the next hour was pure chaos. They argued every rule I tried to enforce. When I refused to let them watch The Exorcist, Ren shrugged and said, "Fine, we'll go into the basement and do our seance instead. You can listen if you want." I didn't let them out of my sight after that. The dinner instructions were simple: grilled cheese and soup. I was in the kitchen prepping when I heard a loud crash, and I sprinted in to find a glass pitcher shattered on the floor. Ren stood beside it stone-faced. "It slipped," she said flatly. Her voice didn't match her expression. It was too calm. Mika sat on the couch watching me with deadpan interest. As I swept the glass into a dustpan and dumped it in the trash, I felt their eyes boring into my back. When I turned around, they quickly looked away. Dinner was quiet, too quiet. I noticed neither of them touched their food, just stared at me with those little half smiles. "Aren't you going to eat?" Ren asked sweetly. Micah nodded. "We made yours special." A chill ran up my spine. I lifted the top slice of my sandwich, and there it was. Shards of glass. Clear, fine slivers. The kind that would slide into your gums and throat without warning, and destroy you from the inside. I stared at them, and they stared back, smiling wider. "What the hell is this? Are you out of your minds?" I shouted to them. They laughed, but not like kids. It was low and mirthless, like something echoing out of a hollow cave. It was wrong. Their expressions didn't change. There was no guilt, no fear, just pure satisfaction. They wanted me to eat it, and they wanted to hurt me and see it happen. Micah leaned in and whispered, "We were just testing to see how soft your teeth are." I grabbed my flip phone and with shaking hands called my older sister Julia. Through tears, I told her what happened. She came, livid, and took over. When the parents got home, Ren and Micah ran to them like perfect angels. I stood there, pale, holding a plate with the glass-filled sandwich. Their mother took one look and said, "Micah's been curious about experiments lately. I'll speak to him." That was it. I never went back. Sometimes I still wonder, what if I hadn't have checked the sandwich? What if I'd swallowed a single bite? And why didn't those parents react like any normal people would? Julia told me later that when she walked us to the car, she saw something through the upstairs window. It was Ren and Micah, just staring down, smiling, not waving, just watching. This happened a few years ago, and even though everything turned out okay in the end, I still get sick thinking about it. After I had my second baby, I had to go back to work when he was around 6 months old. We couldn't afford full-time daycare, and a friend from my mum group recommended a woman called Melanie, who'd babysat for them a few years ago. She was calm, reliable, and great with infants, and when I met her, she seemed nice enough, quiet, gentle, very grandma-like. She said she'd be happy to watch all the kids during the weekdays. At first, everything seemed fine, but after about a week, I started noticing how out of it the boys seemed to be when I got home, like way too tired. Caleb would sleep through feedings, barely opening his eyes. Owen would be groggy and kind of glassy-eyed. Melanie would just smile and said, "They were so active today, they wore themselves out." Okay, sure, I wanted to believe that. But this kept happening day after day. And then Owen started stuttering, not in a developmental way, but a nervous, anxious, stammering kind of stutter. Caleb, meanwhile, went from being a giggly, wiggly baby to just straight up limp. No interest in toys, no babbling, nothing. I brought it up to Melanie once and asked if they were maybe sick or teething or if she'd noticed anything off. She just shook her head and said, "Nope, they're great sleepers. You're lucky." But my gut was screaming something was wrong. My husband and I decided to put a camera in the living room. Nothing fancy, just one of those Wi-Fi nanny cams that looks like a phone charger. And what we saw made me feel physically sick. She was caught on camera spooning a pink liquid, children's cough syrup, into Caleb's mouth in the high chair. For Owen, she mixed it into a sippy cup and told him to drink all of it and that it was nap time. It wasn't just once, it was a pattern. Every day within an hour of me dropping them off, she drugged them, put them into a dark room so she could watch TV and scroll on her phone all afternoon. We called the police immediately. When they searched her bag, they found children's Benadryl and a second bottle of adult diphenhydramine hidden under our sink, which she had apparently been using too. We had no idea it was even there. Toxology tests confirmed both kids had high level of the drug in their system. Caleb had nearly 3 times the recommended dose for his age. She was arrested, charged with felony child endangerment, unauthorized administration of medicine, and a few other charges. She tried to argue in court that she was just trying to help them settle down, and that she was overwhelmed with the 2 kids. She got 7 years in jail. My kids are okay now, thankfully. Owen went through some therapy for the stuttering, and Caleb bounced back after a few months of recovery. But I still don't sleep right. I check on them constantly, and every time they're a little too quiet, I get flashbacks. So yeah, if something feels wrong with your sitter, daycare nanny, anyone, believe your gut. Even if everything looks perfect on the surface. Because some people will do the unthinkable to make their job easier. What chills me the most is knowing how close we came to losing them. Cases like this aren't just disturbing, they've turned deadly. There are real stories out there where children were given just a little too Benadryl or cold medicine to help them sleep, and they never wake. We were lucky, but other parents never get to say that. And if you're hearing this and have any doubts about who's caring for your child, don't wait. Trust your instincts, ask questions, and set up a camera. It could save a life. I was 22 and fresh out of college when I landed what I thought was a dream job, live-in nanny for an ultra-wealthy family in the suburbs of Connecticut. Their house looked like something out of a home design magazine, clean and modern, sprawling lawns, custom everything. The parents were really nice and well-spoken. They had 2 children, Lily 6 and Max 9. Sweet kids, a little quiet, especially Max, but nothing out of the ordinary. On my first day, I was walked through the house and explained the rules. Some of them made no sense. No junk food, no unsupervised screen time. But others struck me as excessive. There were cameras in the hallways, motion sensors in the kids' rooms, and the biggest red flag? Heavy-duty electronic locks on the outside of their bedroom doors. These are for their safety, their mother Victoria explained, with a casual wave of her hand. The system alarms at 9:30 every night and it's automatic. We have an override code if they need me, of course. I remember blinking, standing there trying to smile, while my stomach turned a bit. What kind of danger could possibly justify locking children in their own rooms? That second night, after I put the kids to bed, I heard the locks click into place. A few seconds later, a red light blinked above each door. I stood in the hallway for a moment staring at them, and then walked downstairs to the kitchen where Alan was having a glass of wine. "Everything goes smoothly?" he asked. I nodded too quickly. "Yep, just getting used to the place." But I barely slept that night. The next few weeks were filled with little things. Max flinching whenever his father entered a room. Lily would whisper questions like, "Is Mummy gonna check the doors tonight?" And there were times late at night when I thought I heard soft knocking, almost like one of them was testing the door from the inside. Victoria always dismissed it. "Max sleepwalks," she once said. "It's a better way." I started digging quietly. I didn't find anything at first. The family had scrubbed their online presence clean. Just charity events, business accolades, country club photos. But one night, when I was alone in the office while Victoria and Ellen were out, I'd opened a drawer that was supposed to be locked, and inside was a folder with old court dates. At first they didn't make sense. Sealed records, legal jargon. But one word stood out again and again. Offender. Alan had been convicted of sexual misconduct with a minor 20 years ago. Somehow he still held his position in finance, still hosted lavish parties, and still walked around with a Rolex and was clean shaven. But there it was in black and white. The security system wasn't just for the kids' safety. It was a prison of routine and silence. I lasted a year. A year of pretending I didn't know, of documenting what I could without crossing lines that would get me fired. A year of slowly trying to build trust with Max and Lily without alarming them. I tried to get out sooner, but it was complicated. The job came with housing, and my financial situation didn't give me many options. I kept telling myself, just make it to the summer. You'd have just saved enough. When I finally quit, Victoria didn't ask why. She just nodded and said, "You've been wonderful, thank you." But I left that house with a shaking hand and a pounding heart. It's been a few years now and I've had other jobs. I've moved on in some ways, but sometimes in my dreams I'll hear the lock of the door click. And I think about Max and Lily, wondering what kind of adults they grew up to be. Back in the day, my parents had an authentic Japanese motif for their bedroom. My mum was an interior designer and spent all of her free time antiquing for different pieces. I remember a huge Buddha statue made from solid brass at the foot of their bed, and a silk room divider depicting different scenes from ancient Japanese dynasties. There was a lot more to it than that. At some point, my mother came home with 2 beautiful antique lamps that had come straight from Japan through a client of hers. The lamps were carved and painted porcelain, and like the room divider, depicted scenes from a long ago, simpler time in Japan. The main design on the lamps was a geisha woman holding a fan partially obscuring her face. Each lamp had one, but each geisha was slightly different. They were very delicate, highly detailed, and very beautiful. My sister, who also was very young at the time, dubbed them the Sisters. And this story actually centers around my sister, Lupita. One night our parents were out to dinner with friends, so they called in our babysitter Doris. At the time, the TV channels in our den were restricted, but our parents got all the cable channels in their bedroom, so we all would hang out there when they weren't home. This particular night, we were all watching something R-rated and scary, and it got late, so my brother and I went to our bedrooms. My sister stayed up with Doris to watch the rest of the movie. My sister said Doris was dozing off, and she was left to watch the scary movie by herself. Trying not to look at the screen during a particularly scary part, Lupita looked towards one of the lamps on the nightstand. Glancing at it quickly, she said it looked like something on the lamp moved. Staring at it now, she swore something was moving on both lamps. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. She said the geisha on the lamps were moving and fluttering their fans while whispering and giggling at her and each other. Petrified in total disbelief, Lupita screamed and woke up the babysitter. Doris, no doubt, must have assumed the house was on fire. My sister pointed to the lamps. Doris, still a bit disoriented, for a second saw the geisha move their fans back into position and freeze. She calmed my sister down, telling her it was only her imagination, and eventually, Lupita fell asleep. After putting my sister to bed, Doris waited in the den for my parents to get home. She never mentioned anything about the lamps, but any time my mother called her after, she said she was busy and wouldn't come to our house again. Years later, when I was already an adult, I ran into Doris. She asked how everyone was doing and if we still lived there. I told her no, that my mother had a fire shortly after we moved and lost almost everything. And when I asked her why she never came back, she said, "You're not going to believe this, but the last night I was there, something really strange happened. When I was the only one left awake, I kept hearing voices coming from your parents' room. At first I thought it was your sister pretending to sleep and pranking me. Then when I realized Lupita was fully asleep, I started to get scared. The only thing that kept me running out of the house and never looking back was my responsibility to you two and your parents." She then added, "I know no one will ever believe me, but do you remember those Japanese lamps? I know what Lupita saw. She said they moved, and I saw it too." This was many years ago, and I never saw Doris again after that. My brother had his own experience with those lamps while we were living there. Time passed, my parents got divorced, my mother sold the house when I graduated high school, and she had a new house built in the country where she planned to enjoy her early retirement. She transported all of her beloved pieces there when it was completed. Within 5 years, a freak fire broke out when she wasn't home, and the house and everything in it burnt to the ground. The firefighters said they never saw a fire that burnt so hot. It was so intense that the following day the top of the refrigerator was touching the floor like a rainbow. Later on, my mother told me that although the fire was devastating, in many ways it was also liberating. And I never pushed her further to ask her what she meant by that. I worked as a live-in babysitter for a wealthy, mostly absent man. A job that sounded simple on paper, but turned out to be the weirdest experience of my life. He owned this massive estate just outside of town. Gothic architecture, big iron gates, 3 stories tall, with a garage that could fit a dozen cars. The man himself barely showed up, maybe once every few months. He lived in France with his wife. The mansion was more like a forgotten outpost, a place he kept for reasons that probably made sense only to him. My job was to watch his daughter. She was quiet, polite, and honestly easy to care for. Most of the time she stayed in her room reading, or playing with antique toys that looked like they belonged in a museum, and I slept in a small guest room down the hall, and we mostly had the run of the house to ourselves. That was the problem. The house was strange. It was packed with expensive things, but none of them were cared for. These rooms were filled with crystal bowls, silver trays, pewter goblets, all dumped into piles like someone had been preparing for a garage sale and forgot to actually do it. Dust covered everything. I remember once stepping into what looked like a formal dining room, only to find thousands of dollars worth of antique tableware lying in jumbled heaps. It felt more like a dragon's hoard than someone's home. But the real horror came one day in the night. You see, me and this girl had just been playing, and it was about time to put her to sleep. I did just that when I heard what sounded like someone driving down the driveway, which was odd in itself as we hardly ever had visitors. The guy came about every 3 months, so I assumed it wasn't him because he'd only left about 3 weeks ago. So I do the due diligence and look out the window anyway, and don't notice the car. It definitely isn't one of his lavish ones. It's quite a beat-up old one, and as it was already quite dark, I only noticed that it was like a rusty red color, and it wasn't shiny like normal cars, so it must have been quite old. I told her to just wait in her room and lock the door, and that I was going to go down and ask who it was. I make my way down the stairs and look through the peephole of the door, but no one comes out the car. The car kind of just drives away. I feel a bit weirded out, and even if I would have messaged the guy on my phone, he usually would take his sweet time to reply. But I messaged him anyway and asked him what to do. I didn't even get a reply that day. Anyway, I go back upstairs and tend to the girl, read her a story, put her to sleep, and start my usual routine of going down the stairs, turning on the TV in the living room, and watching TV for the next 2 hours before I go upstairs and pass out myself. It had been a particularly grueling day. The girl had a lot of after-school clubs, and of course I was the one who had to make sure she got there, did it, and came home properly. So I was pretty spent. About an hour after watching something on the TV, I'm asleep, and that's when I hear a kind of hammering at the back door. I nearly jump out my skin. The light over there was turned off, so I leave the light on where I am and start making my way slowly in the darkness, guided only by the outside moonlight in the windows, to see where this person is who's knocking at the back door. The pounding starts again, and then a shatter. They broke the glass, and then I hear a door swing open. That's when I freeze. What the hell's gonna happen now? What are they here for? I hear 2 men talking, and they're making haste towards the room with all the garage sale items, as I like to call it. The guy must have had thousands upon thousands of pounds worth of stuff there, and I honestly have no idea what he wanted to do with it. But I didn't want to make my business to find out what these guys would do to me if they were to see me. So as quickly as I can, I make my way back to the room where I'd been watching TV, turned off the light, and grabbed my phone. I needed to find somewhere where I could call 999 and get the police here. But that meant going up the stairs. And the stairs were wooden and had a habit of creaking in most places. So I sent up a prayer to anyone who was listening and started making my way up the stairs. I thought if I only walked on the edges, maybe it wouldn't creak. When I'm about 2/3 up, I see the little girl is looking down, probably awoken from the noise. She doesn't realize that there's something creepy going on and calls out loud, "What's going on?" And then all noise in the house stops. My eyes widen. She sort of grasps comprehension in that moment, and I tell her to run. Right as I'm bolting up the stairs, I turn around because I hear the 2 guys have now made their way out and are running up the stairs towards us. One of them is holding something heavy in their hand, like a crowbar or a pipe. I don't really remember. I just knew that a whack on the head from that would probably be fatal. Thankfully, her door is nearby. We rush in and lock it, and then I grab her wardrobe and start pushing it towards the door. I just pray that it holds. We run into her bathroom and hide in the bath with the curtain drawn, knowing full well that it won't provide any real coverage if those guys break in. But I take a moment to start calling the police. They tell me they'll be there in about 15 minutes, because of course this guy lives quite rurally, and we just lie there huddled. I can't explain the true fear you feel in those moments, knowing that at any moment some violent psycho can run into the room, swing something in your head, and remove you from this world permanently. Those moments holding her were some of the tensest and most frightening of my life. Thankfully, the police made it even faster. Turns out a patrol vehicle wasn't far, and then we heard the sirens coming down the driveway. That's when we heard the men running down the stairs as fast as they could and fleeing the property. The police did eventually catch them. They were just looking for something to steal and thought the house would be empty. I'm not sure how they didn't notice the light on in a downstairs room, or maybe they assumed because it was so quiet that it was on a timer or something and done on purpose. Honestly, I never found out. Thankfully for the girl, the dad decided it would be time to bring her over to France, and I was let go. Honestly, I was going to quit shortly after, but because of the girl and our attachment, I found it really hard to say goodbye. It's been a number of years now. I hope she's doing well. I never did find out what happened to that house, but I'm in no hurry to find out. When I was 16, I babysat for a lot of wealthy families in the area. Most were nice enough, some tipped well, others left notes on the fridge, and a few even offered me dinner from their private chefs. But there was one family I'll never forget, and not because of their money, but because something about them didn't sit right. They lived in a huge, cold house at the end of a winding cul-de-sac. Multiple cars, a nanny, a cook, and what looked like rotating maids. Their parents had 3 kids under the age of 10, which were all surprisingly polite. The mum was quiet, a little tense but kind. But the dad? He's the reason I'm even sharing this. He was in his mid-40s, well-dressed, well-groomed, and always had a glass of red wine in his hand. It became a sort of running joke in my head. This guy had about enough money to drink anything in the world, and he chose the bulk stuff from Costco. He even talked about it, how it was underrated, and how people didn't appreciate things that looked average. That should have been a red flag. Anyway, they started requesting me more often, and always last minute. Sometimes I'd show up, and the cook and nanny would be gone for the evening, which meant I was suddenly responsible for everything. Dinner, bedtime, meltdowns, and the creeping sense that I was being watched. Every time I arrived, the dad would insist I eat something. "The chef made too much," he'd say, even when I knew they were out for the night. He'd press a plate into my hands and say, "Eat please, you're so thin." Then he tried to give me money double my rate, triple once. I rarely accepted it. I don't know why. Something about his tone felt off. This wasn't generosity, it was bait. There was one night that still makes me sick whenever I think about it. They had a dinner party and asked if I could stay late. I said sure, money's money. I got there around 6 p.m. and the cook told me the parents would be home late, maybe midnight. The kids were already eating when I arrived and everything seemed normal. At around 10 p.m, the youngest had a nightmare. While I was calming her down, I heard the front door open and figured the parents were back early. I tucked the girl in and headed downstairs, only the dad was home. He was in the kitchen drinking his usual Costco wine, leaning against the island like he owned the place, which of course he did, but the look in his eyes wasn't the relaxed, half-drunk expression I was used to. "You're a good girl, smart and responsible," he said. I nodded, mumbled something polite back, and turned to grab my bag from the couch. Then he said, "Have you ever had wine before?" "I'm 16, I reminded him, trying to keep my voice neutral. "That's not a no." Then he poured another glass and slid it across the counter towards me. "Just a sip. I won't tell, I promise." I backed away and said I needed to check on the kids. He didn't move, just watched me walk upstairs like a damn hawk. I locked the door to the oldest kid's room and sat on the floor for a while, heart pounding. After maybe 20 minutes, I peeked into the hallway. Quiet. No sound from the downstairs. I grabbed my bag, snuck down, and went to the front door, which was locked. Deadbolted too. I started turning the knob slowly, trying not to make noise, and that's when I heard him, behind me, looking for something. He was standing in the shadow of the hallway, still holding the wine glass and watching me with that creepy little smile. I lied and said I thought I heard the dog outside. They didn't have a dog. He stepped closer. "You should stay the night. There's a guest room. It's safer, you know, for girls like you." My mouth went dry. I forced a laugh and said, "Actually, my dad's on his way. He hates it when I'm late." That seemed to do something. His face twitched just slightly and he stepped back. I took the opportunity to unlock the door and walked out as calmly as I could, even though my legs felt like jelly. As soon as I hit the sidewalk, I ran to the end of the block and called my mum from a neighbor's driveway. I didn't tell her everything, just that the dad was acting weird and I didn't feel safe. The next day, the mum called and left me a voicemail, saying she was sorry if things got strange and that they wouldn't need a sitter anymore. Her voice cracked halfway through, like she'd been crying. I never went back. A year later, I learned they moved out of state. Something about the dad transitioning careers, and I've never been able to find him online. No LinkedIn, no Facebook, no anything. But sometimes I still think about how insistent he was. The food, the wine, the money. And how it didn't feel like the first time he tried that line. "You're a good girl. Smart. Responsible." To the man who only drank Costco wine and thought a 16-year-old girl with braces would be an easy target, I hope we never meet again. I was around 12 years old when one of the weirdest things ever happened right in my own living room. That afternoon, my parents had gone out for a few hours and left me with our usual babysitter, a girl from a few streets over, who was around 17. She'd watched me a few times before. She wasn't especially talkative, mostly kept to herself, but she'd sit nearby while I played NES and sometimes asked what the games were about. I figured she was just bored. That day I was in my room building something with Lego when my parents came home earlier than expected. As soon as they walked through the front door, my mum got this suspicious look. She glanced over at the entertainment center, then at the babysitter, who was now stiffly sitting on the couch, arms folded tight over her chest like she was cold. "Where are all the games that were out there earlier?" my mum asked. She sounded calm, but I could tell something was off. A couple of my favorite cartridges, Ninja Garden and Double Dragon, had been sitting on the coffee table earlier that day, and now they were gone. The babysitter shifted a little. "Oh, I don't know, maybe he put them away," she said, glancing towards me. "No, I never touched them." That's when my dad said he was going to check the living room camera. He had installed a small camcorder up high in the living room after a minor break-in a few months earlier, and it was recording everything in the main area, and the babysitter suddenly went pale. He fast-forwarded through a few hours of footage, and there it was, clear as day. She waited until I left the room, looked around like she was about to commit a felony, and grabbed a few games and stuffed them into her clothes. I remember watching the footage in disbelief, trying to figure out why she was even putting them there. My mum turned to her and asked, "Is there something you'd like to tell us?" She shook her head furiously. "I didn't take anything." And no exaggeration, a plastic clatter hit the floor. Ninja Garden had literally slipped down her pant leg and landed at her feet. There was a full 5 seconds of stunned silence, and then my mum just said, "Come with me." She led the babysitter into one of the back rooms and closed the door. I could hear her voice firm, not yelling, just asking the girl to hand over everything, and she did, one by one. She started pulling up NES cartridges out from under her shirt, the waistband of her pants, and even tucked under the strap of her bra on her back, like she turned her body into some kind of game smuggling operation. She must have spent a lot of time figuring out how to hide them without anyone noticing, as NES games were not small. When they came back out, Mum had all the games stacked in her hands. The babysitter was red-faced and avoiding everyone's eyes. My mum calmly told her that she wouldn't be paid and needed to leave immediately. No big scene, no police, just, "You can go now." She walked out the front door without a word, and we never saw her again. This happened a few years ago when I was living in Japan. I had just finished college and was looking for a way to stay abroad a little longer before figuring out the next steps in life. I ended up landing a job through a sketchy-looking but legit agency that placed foreign women as babysitters for wealthy families. The pay was amazing too, and housing was included. The only downside, you had to commit for staying for 3 months, and your passport would be held by the agency for visa processing, which is apparently legal over there. Yeah, I know, red flag number 1. I was placed with a man called Mr. Okihara, who lived alone, allegedly with his children in a massive estate up in the mountains near Karuizawa. The house was beautiful. Traditional Japanese architecture, shoji doors, cedar floors, and that eerie atmosphere that comes with old money and isolation. When I arrived, I realized I wasn't the only one. There were 7 other girls living there too, all foreign and all around my age, and all confused about what we were doing there. We each had our own uniform, identical navy blue dresses with little white bows and black flats. Our names weren't used, we were numbered. I was 4. No one saw the kids, ever. We just heard them. Once in a while, we'd hear footsteps upstairs, the sound of small feet running down the hallway or soft crying behind locked doors. But no one was allowed on the 2nd floor. That rule was drilled in from the first night. Our days were filled with pointless chores, polishing furniture that wasn't dusty, prepping food that someone else had cooked, tidying playrooms no one had used. But the nights, they were the worst. At exactly 8:30 p.m. every evening, a bell rang throughout the house. That was our cue to gather in the drawing room and sit in complete silence, while Mr. Okihara stood in front of the fireplace and recited the events of that day. He never spoke to us, only at us. Today I had sweet fish and soba noodles for lunch. I made 3.4 million yen in the market. I remember my mother used to hum when she cleaned. I miss that. It was unsettling. We weren't allowed to interrupt or ask questions. We just had to sit hands on lap, back straight and listen. The first time someone sneezed during his story, he stopped mid-sentence and stared at us for what felt like a full minute. Then he started over from the very beginning, and the girl who sneezed left the next day and we never saw her again. After the story time, we'd go to our shared bunk room. At midnight sharp, a second bell rang. That meant lights out, and not just going to sleep. The power to our entire wing was automatically cut. Phones didn't work in our rooms. There was no signal, no Wi-Fi, and we all shared one bathroom near the laundry room, where sometimes we could get a weak connection. About 2 weeks in, I started hearing crying in the middle of the night. Not one voice, but several, and sometimes in sync. I thought maybe it was one of the other girls, but they were all accounted for. So one night I woke up at 2 a.m. and noticed my door was slightly ajar. That was weird, I always locked it. I got up to close it when I heard something upstairs. Soft thudding footsteps and the crying again, this time closer. I didn't know what got into me, but I left my room and followed the sound. I know it sounds stupid, but I had to know. The stairs were really steep and cold. And as I reached the top, I saw a faint light spilling out from under a door at the end of the hallway, and I moved closer. The crying was coming from inside, multiple voices, and they were children, or at least that's what it sounded like. I reached out to touch the door, and it opened fast like someone had yanked it from the inside. Mr. Okihara stood there in the doorway, calm and expressionless. Behind him, I saw what looked like an old nursery. Cribs lined the walls, some empty, some not. And I swear to God, I saw something move under a blanket. But it wasn't shaped like a kid. It was long and thin. I didn't say a word, neither did he. He just raised one finger and pointed back down the stairs. I packed at first light, took only what I could carry, left my shoes and ran barefoot to the nearest train station and never returned. The agency tried to contact me, but I ignored everything. I got a new friend and stayed with a friend in Nagano, and eventually flew home. But I still wonder, what the hell was happening in that house? When I was 17, I wanted to work as an au pair, which is a kind of permanent babysitter arrangement. And the only place close to me that I could go as a 17-year-old was England. So I found this family, a mother with 2 kids, boy and a girl. I messaged them and talked to the mother, and she seemed very interested and very nice. We set up a date for me to go, and that was that. When I got to the airport, I was very confused that they weren't there to collect me. I messaged the mother and asked her where she was and if it would be long for them to pick me up. She told me she was on her way and just stuck in traffic, and I thought that was fair. She told me to go to the exit and wait. Then not long after, she told me she was there and that she was in a blue car. I was looking around very confused, since I couldn't really see any blue cars there. When I finally found it, some other woman than the one I had been talking to walked out of the car and towards me. The instant I made eye contact with this other woman, I got a long text from the woman that I was supposed to work for, where it basically said her husband had come home from the country he worked in, and that they had fought because he didn't want an au pair in the house. And for some reason she didn't want to tell me that, so she just gave me to her good friend who needed one anyway. I was very confused. It was a bit much and I was quite scared. It all seemed very weird, as if someone was watching me and had been waiting for the right moment to send the text. The woman seemed very friendly, but was hurrying and taking my things and putting them in her car while talking to me. I'm a bit nervous and non-confrontational by nature, so I didn't really know what to do or say other than just to follow her in what she was doing. When it was all done, she told me that we should get going, and I told her I wasn't really feeling comfortable with all of it. She told me that she understood, but she really needed the help, and also had 2 children at home, but that we had to move fast because of the place she was parked. So we got in the car and started driving out of the airport pickup spot. The second we started moving, I told her I was very uncomfortable with this and really wanted to get out and stay in the airport. She seemed a bit upset by this and told me that she could drop me off, but that she has to get out of where we were because she could get a ticket for letting me out there or something, which I didn't know if it was true or not. We drove for a few minutes still on the airport ground, and we stopped a bit of a way so that I could call my parents. I talked to them sobbing the whole time, and I noticed that while I was talking to them, the woman inside her car began talking to a woman, the one I had been speaking to, I presume. I didn't understand the language they were speaking, so I can't say what they were talking about. When I was done talking, I got into the car again and told her that I really wanted her to let me out, and she kept asking me if I wasn't sure I didn't want to go into town with her, if I didn't want her to drop me off by the shopping center. I of course told her no, that I really wanted to be let out by the airport. She did, thankfully, and I went inside and spoke with my parents. After this happened, I got some really weird voice memos from her and 2 other people. I couldn't understand them, but it was strange. My parents also tried contacting her and she blocked both of them. If you don't know, a lot of au pairs are being treated very poorly. So for us to feel safe and secure, and sure that we weren't going to get cheated out of paying or working more than we were supposed to, we have to sign a contract. Later on, I found out the contract she had sent was fake and not binding. Not to mention her address was bogus. I later found out the city I had flown into and was supposed to be living in was a hot spot for human trafficking. I didn't know this until later. There was a lot of sketchy stuff going on. That whole time my gut was screaming at me that this was a bad situation. And I'm so glad I listened, because I'm quite sure that had I not listened, I would have been human trafficked, and I wouldn't be here to share this story with you today. I'd been a pretty regular nanny for an amazing family for the past 4 years. They're genuinely great people, kind and respectful, and always treated me like part of the family. The little boy I care for is sweet and clever, with a wild imagination that makes watching him feel more like hanging out with a tiny whirlwind of personality, rather than doing a job. Since I'd started, I'd seen them go through a couple of different weekday nannies. Usually it was nothing too dramatic, just not the right fit or someone had a schedule conflict. But there was one situation that changed completely the way I think about having cameras in kids' rooms. There's only one baby monitor in the house, and it's in the little dude's room. It has audio and video, and the parents usually check in occasionally, especially if he's playing quietly for a while or if someone new is watching him. One weekend morning I came in and the mum asked me if she could show me something. She looked, well, not mad, but more like she hadn't slept in days, more worried and disturbed. She pulled up a saved video clip on the monitor app, and what I saw left me cold. The little guy was sitting on the floor with some toys when the nanny came in and told him it was time to clean up. He said very calmly and with zero attitude, "Mummy said I don't have to do that." Then she snapped. She said in this sharp, almost venomous tone, "Well, it doesn't matter anymore. Mummy's a cow," and a few other choice words, then grabbed him by the back of his shirt and dragged him out the room like a sack of laundry. I was already stunned when the mum told me there was more. Apparently they had started checking the cameras more often because their son had been saying weird things. Not just about being scared or not wanting to be alone, but about how the nanny would come into his room at night. They hadn't believed it at first because the nanny wasn't even supposed to be there after dinner. But one night just before they were planning to let her go, they checked the monitor around midnight. She was in his room, just standing in the doorway for 2 solid minutes, watching him sleep. Then she quietly shut the door and walked out. The parents had no idea she had a key. She'd made a copy of the house keys without asking, and had been letting herself in late at night just watching him. When the mum showed me that clip, I felt my heart drop to my stomach. They confronted her the next morning. She denied it obviously until they mentioned the footage, and she got angry, like furious, screamed about how they didn't understand what the boy really needed, and had security escort her and changed all the locks that same day. To this day I still think about how easily they could have missed it, if they hadn't have had that monitor, or if they hadn't trusted their kid's instincts. Who knows how long it would have gone on for? She was normal on paper, polite during interviews, and experienced. Background checks came back clean. And yet she stood over that boy at midnight, like she was waiting for something. A number of years ago, my wife and I found ourselves in a position where it was completely necessary for us to hire a live-in babysitter. We both had quite good jobs in our separate industries, and with 3 young children, it was impossible to balance everything. Thankfully, when the agency sent her, she seemed reasonably okay. But as time started to tick away, we began noticing a few things about her that didn't really sit well with us. She was quite inattentive, sometimes mean to the children, which we gave her fair warning about, but tried to cut her some slack, as she was only about 19. My wife told me she didn't like her, but as I had been the one to hire her through the agency, she saw me as the responsible party. Honestly, at this point she'd been working with us for a few months, and were nearly at our wits' end with her. She did have her good points, but when she got into a bad mood or just showed up and didn't actually want to do the job, it made it quite challenging. It was a Friday, I remember that. For one reason or another, the kids didn't have school, and it was a very rare day for me as I got to work from home. My wife never has that luxury. I was in the office on my computer. I had instructed the nanny to take the children to the small pool we had in our back garden. She was instructed to not let them remove their life vests for any circumstances, as the children were not completely comfortable swimming independently yet, and without me or my wife present, we didn't really want any accidents happening. Probably a few of you can see where this is going, and you're absolutely right. About an hour into pool play, I was thinking it's about time they get out. The sun was high in the sky, and their sunscreen surely must have washed off by now. So I called out to them and told them I was going to bring them some towels. The children complained, and I said I'd give them 5 more minutes, as I was going to finish a task I had been working on. So I go back. I'm hammering away at the keys when I hear crying. This isn't good. I make my way outside, and I see my eldest child spitting water like they'd been choking. I ask what's been going on, and the nanny tells me that she had been disobedient and makes up some stuff which I can't really recall. But then my eldest child tells me what really happened was the following. She decided to take off her life vest, which I admit wasn't a good idea. The babysitter chose to do nothing about it, not tell me, not ask her to put it back on, but just ignored her. And then my eldest jumped into the deep end. That wasn't a good idea either, because she couldn't touch the floor, which is something we'd already established. She was kicking and asking for help, grabbing the corner of the pool. The sitter swam up to my eldest, and when they asked her for help, she looked at them and said no, and swam away to see the other 2 children. In that moment, she went under, breathed in a lot of water, and managed to kick the bottom and propel herself just enough to cling to the edge of the shallower part of the pool and drag herself up, flopping and spitting water and very upset, naturally. When we checked the cameras, the one who was indeed telling the truth was my eldest child, and we were incredibly disappointed. I suppose the point of this story, if there even is one, is be careful who you trust with your children. Had my eldest not been able to propel themselves forward, they might not be here today, and that's a terrifying thought. All because we put our trust in someone we thought we could trust in, but sadly we were mistaken. When our second child was born, life turned into chaos. We hired a nanny, someone who came highly recommended and said all the right things, and seemed to qualify perfectly to care for our 2-year-old and 5-month-old. I had my reservations, of course. Years of working as a social worker have taught me to never take people at face value, not when kids are involved. So out of what I can only describe as deep-rooted paranoia from everything I'd witnessed in my career, neglect, abuse, the unthinkable, I had cameras installed in our home, which were live streamed straight to our phones. One particular day, I was 2 hours away from home, visiting some foster kids for work. My husband called. His voice wasn't panicked, but there was a hard edge to it. "You need to see the camera feed." I pulled over and watched in disbelief. Our nanny had locked our 2-year-old in her bedroom alone for hours. Worse, she hadn't picked up our 5-month-old once in 4 hours, not to change him, not to comfort him, not even to feed him properly. Instead, she had propped up his bottle with a pile of pillows and walked away. Left a 5-month-old lying there like an afterthought. My husband and his co-workers were watching the live stream at his office, furious. He stayed on the line with me the entire drive home, maybe to make sure I didn't do something I'd regret. I was livid. I walked in and fired her on the spot. My husband later said it was one of the most satisfying things he'd ever seen. But he admitted he kept his phone ready just in case I needed bail money. Looking back, I realized it could have been worse, much worse, but for me it was enough. That moment changed everything. I quit working not long after, and have been home ever since for 9 years now. The career that wants to find me didn't matter anymore. The trauma I'd spent years witnessing had done one good thing. It gave me the kind of hypervigilance that probably saved my kids from something worse. 7 years ago, I was accepted into the position of an au pair for a family called the Hamiltons. I thought it was a dream opportunity. They lived in a beautiful old home in a quiet English village. Ivy-covered stone walls, rose gardens, the kind of place you'd see in a film. It sort of reminded me of Downton Abbey. And the job paid really well. And I had my own room with a locking door, and they all seemed lovely at first. Rachel and Martin, the parents, were both professionals, soft-spoken and polite. And their son Oliver was 7. He was quiet, polite, maybe too polite for his age, and the first time I met him, he stared up at me with these pale blue eyes and said something I'll never forget. "I hope you don't get scared easily." I thought it was a joke. I mean, kids say weird stuff all the time. But I'd learned later that Oliver wasn't joking, not even close. The first week went by smoothly enough, though there were odd moments. Toys would appear at the foot of my bed at night, even though I always made sure the door was locked. I'd wake up to his drawing slipped under my door. Black, scribbled things, people hanging from trees, figures with no faces. When I'd asked him about it, he'd just shrug and smile. The first time he tried to hurt me was subtle. I was cleaning up breakfast while he played in the garden. When I went out to call him in, I didn't see the tripwire stretched low between 2 trees, and I hit the ground hard, head bouncing off a root. I remember blinking up at that grey sky while he stood over me expressionless. "You shouldn't have come here," he said softly before turning and walking away. I told him his mother, Rachel, who gave me a tight smile and said, "You really need to be more careful. You're the adult here." The second time, he waited until I was in the bath. I always locked the bathroom door, but that night I couldn't latch. I'm not sure why. and I heard it creak open, and then the sound of something clicked into place. When I tried to stand, I realized he'd poured liquid soap all over the tiled floor. I slipped hard, slamming my back into the bathtub edge, and scrambled out shaken and sore, and I caught a glimpse of him peeking around the doorframe. He didn't run, he just stared at me and said, "You screamed louder the last time." What does he mean, the last time? When I confronted the parents again, their entire demeanor shifted. Martin told me I was too highly strung. Rachel accused me of projecting problems onto their son. Then, this is the part I'll never forget. She knelt beside Oliver, looked him right in the eye and said, "Don't worry, sweetheart. She won't blame you anymore. It's not your fault she can't handle it." That same night, they removed my bedroom key. Just told me they didn't think I needed that kind of barrier between me and the family. I could hardly sleep. For 3 nights, I kept a chair propped under the doorknob and lay fully dressed in bed, a heavy flashlight clutched in my hand. I'd hear him out there. The night before I left, I caught him trying to slide a knife under my door, just slowly pushing it through the crack. That was it. I told the Hamiltons I was leaving in the morning. Rachel stared at me with that kind of blank smile. "Of course, we understand." When I tried to take my suitcase downstairs, Martin blocked the stairwell. "You need to find another way," he said flatly. I didn't understand at first. "You want me to?" "You're not taking anything down the stairs. Rachel doesn't want Oliver seeing you leave." So I threw everything out of the second floor window, boxes, clothes, my suitcase, which burst open on the gravel drive, and they watched from the porch as I packed the car. Oliver smiled at me one last time standing between his parents. His mouth moved as I slammed the trunk shut. I couldn't hear what he said through the glass, but I didn't need to. I already knew. I reported everything to my agency, and they told me they'd look into it. And a few weeks later, I checked the family listings again. They were looking for a new au pair. It was the same house and same child, but this time, under a different name. I'm so glad I got out of there. When I was 16, my friend and I took a babysitting job in a quiet lakeside town. Only she was officially hired, but we always went together. It made the evenings feel less weird. We were watching a little boy of about 6. His father was some kind of consultant, always vague about details. They clearly had money. The house was absolutely massive. The boy never really spoke though, but he listened and watched and understood everything. He was smart, but locked in his own silence. Every now and then, if we were alone, he'd whisper a word or two to me, but he'd hardly ever speak around anyone else as far as I could tell. The first time I really felt something was off was when we were playing hide and seek. He tugged on my hand and led me straight to his dad's bedroom. He was strangely calm as he opened a drawer and showed me something he definitely shouldn't have known about. An oversized adult toy tucked away in velvet lining. He never said anything, just looked at me with this flat, unreadable expression, then shut the drawer and tugged me back to keep hiding. We curled up behind a big armchair in the study, and after a long stretch of quiet, he whispered, "Just stay here." It was one of the few things I ever heard him say. We stayed there a while, him curled up in my lap like he was trying to be invisible. There was also a rifle, some kind of semi-automatic, perched on top of an old china cabinet in the dining room. One evening his dad came home early, smiling and very friendly. He poured us both shots of some syrupy cinnamon liqueur and laughed like it was all normal. He said he wanted to show us something cool, So we followed him out to his garage at the back of the property that was full of custom motorcycles and sports cars. He opened up one of the cars and asked if we wanted to go for a spin. I passed, but my friend, braver and more curious than me, said yes, and tore around the lot with him while I stood by the door, stomach turning. Nothing overtly bad happened that night, but I could tell something wasn't right. The following event happened the last time we went to babysit that kid. We were called over and we went, and this time, he had a look of sadness in his eyes. I asked him what was wrong while my friend was preparing some lunch for us, and he just wouldn't say anything and kept looking down at his feet. Then he curled up on my lap, like he had done before, and after about half an hour, he just tugged my hand and took me back to his father's bedroom. He pointed to the drawer, the one which I already knew the contents of, and then he just looked at me, eyes full of tears, and I understood. The father had been doing unspeakable things to his own son, and when the dad made it back and the son had gone to bed, he started making more small talk with us than ever before. He asked how old we were, if we had boyfriends, if we were into anything or had any fantasies. He was dropping hints like he could make stuff happen if we wanted to inquire more. I was picking up on it straight away, but my friend, who I hadn't shared this information with, was a bit clueless and sort of went along with what he was suggesting without really understanding what she was agreeing to. I said I was tired and we called it a night and went home. Then, when we got in, I explained to her everything that had happened, what I'd seen in the drawer, what he had said to me without words, and when she realized, we tried to call the police. But of course they weren't going to buy what two 16-year-olds were saying. We might have just been angry with our boss. They just laughed it off and hung up the phone. But we never returned, even though the money was great. I still wonder about that boy. I wonder what became of him. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this collection of stories. It was nice to have a mix of stories where the babysitters are, like the victims, and then they're also the perpetrators. I thought it was a fun mix and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. As a parent, it is especially daunting, which is why I don't do this topic very often. I think it's been like 4 or 6 years or something. So yeah. Be careful and mindful of who's watching your children and who has your trust. I guess that's the moral of these stories. So feel free to join me tomorrow because we have camping stories. Ooh, it's going to be good. Back to the woods. Thank you all so much for listening. A huge thanks as always to my members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen. And if you'd like to join and get cool perks, follow in the description to find out more. But until next time, stay awesome and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.